What's up, my dudes? And welcome back to the channel. Now today we're going to be learning about Library of Ruina from a video suggested to me about Roland's story. I'm assuming a character from the series. Now, apparently this video kind of, while it focuses on the one character, it also goes into the lore as a whole. So it's a pretty good primer as to what this game is about. Now I do want to address this in the intro, because I know for a fact that there's probably going to be a ton of comments about this, so I'll just say it here. Zero, why aren't you playing the game? Just play the game, dude. And to that I say, I wish I had enough time to do everything that everybody asked of me. There's just too many games for me to cover, so realistically speaking, this is kind of like the best way that I can at least learn about the cool things that you guys know about. And I'm just super thankful to these videos that cover the lore like this. But of course, before we get into this reaction, please make sure to go and support the original video. Link to that will be at the very top of the description, like always.
I have nothing but my sorrow, and I want nothing more. It has been, it still is, faithful to me. Why should I begrudge it, since during the hours when my soul is crushed to the depths of my heart, it was seated there besides me? Because I know, on that day of my final agony, you will be there, lying in my sheets, O sorrow, so that you might once again attempt to enter my heart. This is a slightly paraphrased reading of the Prayer for Loving Sorrow in Francis James' poetry collection, The Morning of Prime Roses, which has gone on to become almost a mantra for the fixers who live long enough within the city of Project Moon's main setting, reminding them to never get truly attached to your companions and put boundaries between you and others.
I mean, yeah, especially in a world like this, creating any sort of connections to people can be pretty risky, considering the general life expectancy, even of these fixers, right? Like, they're more powerful than your average citizen, but that doesn't mean that they're immune to danger.
As no matter how strong you've become, one day everything you know could be taken from you without a moment's notice. And no one knows this better than the masked monochrome macabre mercenary maliciously massacring malignant magnates, Roland, the patron librarian of the floor for general works.
Do not let him get to the rip. Don't do it, pal. Do not do it.
Straight up SCP.
모든 걸 빼앗고 그 이상으로 되돌려주겠어.
Roland is one of the leading protagonists for the main story of Library of Ruina, being a mysterious but charming individual who claims to be nothing more than a washed-up grade 9 fixer who just so happened to end up within the monolithic megastructure known as the library while simply on his way to get lunch. But the reality of the situation is that Roland is one of the fiercest destructive forces within the city, a man whose rampage created ripples within the world that changed the fate of many other powerful figures. And his time in the library was mostly spent lying in wait for the right opportunity to take the revenge he so eagerly wished for. Though before we get too deeply into that, let's understand the meaning behind his name and design. Starting first with his design, Roland on the surface may seem pretty simple, being a character with a monochrome black and white color palette, a short ergonomic hairstyle, and a pretty standard two-piece suit without any additional flourishes. Though, while it is simple, it is specifically crafted with a purpose, as
in some ways, he looks like he could be an NPC, but there is still something within his character design that suggests, you know, just a hint of danger. It's probably due to his eyes. Like, his eyes hide a lot more than they seem to, but obviously they're trying to not outwardly show that. It's in moments like these where I wish Serby was here to, like, talk more about the character design, but yeah, that's all I can do. I ain't no artist.
He's not only confirmed to be based off of a specific person, that being the Scottish actor James McAvoy, seemingly taking from McAvoy's own photo shoots on the cover of either Esquire magazine in 2007, or from a photo shoot with Mean magazine in 2008, with the Mean magazine shoot matching more of Roland's color palette, while the Esquire magazine matches his more general look. But also, Roland is designed to be purposefully misleading, making him appear very unassuming like most player surrogate characters would be. His suit even resembles the general worker uniform of a newbie Nugget from Lobotomy Corp, meaning that even veterans of Project Moon can come into this game and be slightly fooled by this design. Now, the name Roland, like many other in Project Moon works, comes from a literary origin, this of course being Duke Roland of Charlemagne lore, also known by his Italian name, Orlando, which, to avoid confusion over whom I'm speaking about throughout this video, I will exclusively be referring to the Paladin as Orlando. Now, Orlando was one of the strongest of Charlemagne's 12 paladins and a central figure in a bunch of famous works throughout history, with most famous of them being the Song of Roland. As well, this naming theme of Roland the character is the reason to why many of those surrounding him are also themed after the Knights of Charlemagne, and more importantly, why his fixer organization is Charles' office and contained 12 members prior to Angelica's employment.
Okay. I do just want to point out here that I don't know anything at all about this particular story. There's a lot of like stuff in Western culture that I'm just not familiar with. Don't come after me. I know that it's maybe hard for some people to realize, but like, there are people from other places of the world who know more about their mythology than yours. I'm sorry.
So, speaking of Angelica, Roland's French roots weren't the only point of inspiration for his character, as the Paladin Orlando has a strong Italian history, and more specifically was featured in 2 epic poems of the Italian Renaissance, that being Orlando Innamorato and Orlando Furioso, with both the titles of these works and the feats of the titular character Orlando being repurposed into Roland's own character and abilities. From Roland finding a new purpose in life thanks to his loving feelings for a woman named Angelica, as well then experiencing that love be denied by the world, which then leads him to a nearly unstable fury that devastated friends and foes, and of
I was gonna say, I don't even need to know the story. It's not gonna end well. I don't think it ends well for anybody in this series. If you're in a relationship with somebody, they're probably gonna die, especially if they're not like a main character. Honestly, even main characters are gonna die here.
Of course, both characters possess the legendary sword, Durandal, which in legend is not only just a holy relic,
Marathon flashbacks.
with it either being a gifted blade from an angel or the tip from the spear of Hector, the Trojan hero. It is also an immensely powerful and fiercely loyal sentient sword to its owner, which would give Orlando the power to devastate entire towns, let alone armies, with a single swing of its blade. It was also this weapon's power that made it a target for those who wished to oppose Charlemagne, and in Ruina's case, Roland possesses a Durandal of his own. Coming from an unknown place, it is his signature weapon from his times as a fixer before the events of the game, and this previous history is seen in both his usage of it during flashbacks, but also because it's the only normal attack page from his own personal deck with a proper name. Roland's history and origins even reflect his literary inspiration, as they were both born into a poor, lower class or peasant-like position, with Roland even being orphaned at such a young age he never even really knew his parents. Though, unlike the Paladin Orlando, Roland didn't have a natural born claim to fame. He had to earn his way out of the slums. As during his times living in the backstreet like one of the rats, Roland eventually came under the care and tutelage of a person who he'd only ever end up referring to as his Gran. This woman is all but directly confirmed to be the colored fixer Iori, the purple tier, who would instill into Roland the skills which would make him an above average fixer, which got him started in fixer work at a relatively young age.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't think we learned anything about her in particular when we learned about the Lobotomy Corporation lore. At least I don't think. It's been a while since the last video, so maybe I've forgotten a few details here and there.
Though, due to the line of work that Roland would end up taking as that said fixer, he, like most residents of the city, slowly began to degrade in his sense of self. Soon enough, he'd worked so much doing unseemly things for others that he had lost track of what he wanted for himself. Roland losing sight of his personal identity to a more outward social one he created for his career works perfectly in line with Roland's own character's relationship with the psychological concept of the persona.
You know, I was gonna say, it reminds me a little bit, obviously to a much lesser degree in terms of like brutality, but those content creators who get lost in the sauce, where you end up chasing views for so long that you forget who you truly are. And then comes the whole identity crisis, and you're just kind of doing things and acting in certain ways because that's what gets you views. It's really sad to see when like your favorite content creators who you've been watching since you were a kid kind of turn into that. And honestly, something I'm like super afraid of ever happening. So I just try to do everything that I can to keep myself in check. Don't get a big head. Which, you know, maybe presumptuous of me to say, because the channel definitely isn't going to get that big. But it's always just a fear.
Introduced by Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, with the name persona coming directly from the name for an actor's mask in a stage play. This term is described as the mask which we create to deal with our own social hardships, while also concealing the true nature of our individual. Roland not only represents this idea in his career as a fixer, but also in his character throughout the whole of the game. But one of the biggest failings of the persona as well is a persona requires a strong ego to maintain control of it, as without that, the person risks fusing with their mask. As Carl Jung describes it, someone without a strong ego risks becoming identical to their persona, making them nothing more than a shallow conformist. Their identity becomes the mask, someone who lives entirely unconscious of any distinction between themselves and the world in which they live in.
Interesting. That explains a lot about why we've seen shots of him with like this blank mask on him. I don't know if that's like an edit or if that's in-game, if that's his actual mask. But if that's the themes that we're going with, then yeah, that makes sense.
And as I mentioned, this all but perfectly describes Roland's character throughout a majority of the game.
In fact, it's not just the mask too. Just the way that he dresses and his entire character design. It's like, you know, this is what you expect of a fixer, right? This is the image of a fixer, but it is not like stylized or unique to him, which is entirely the point of the character design.
He would even begin wearing a literal mask to reinforce this connection to the persona, but it also held a more diegetic purpose as well for his character, as Iori taught Roland the importance of keeping his identity a secret, because in the fixer line of work, leaving yourself vulnerable in any ways can get you killed. This is
to a much lesser extent, yes, even being like an online persona too. It's not the greatest idea to go out there telling everybody who you are and showing your face everywhere, because there are some disturbed people on the internet. Like, so often you'll hear the stories about like female streamers getting harassed by crazed fans who maybe believe that things were happening when things were in fact not happening and the streamer doesn't even know them. But you know, there are just people like that out there. It's a dangerous world.
Is why he wore a perception blocking mask, which is an all-black mask that covers Roland's face in its entirety, leaving behind nothing but a dark void. He is almost an empty shell while wearing this.
The effects of the
mask also make it so that Roland appears as nothing more than a passerby in a crowd of noise, or lack thereof in some cases. Though it was this specific lack of self, alongside his own unique set of skills, that made Roland a perfect candidate to be enlisted into the Smoke Wars, which was an organized hostile takeover of the original L Corp, an energy production company which provided power to the city before Lobotomy Corp. This old L Corp was known for being a bit stingy, boosting the prices to the point that other major corps weren't too happy with them, though beyond the size of the energy build, the byproduct of their energy production was also a major sore spot for the city, being this toxic smoke that caused extreme reactions in those who came in contact with it. And these reactions could either whether it be emotional or physical,
Silent
but
Hill.
soon enough, K-Corp, I-Corp, and R-Corp were all officially enlisted into the efforts, and these corps themselves would go on to hire offices, and more specifically fixers, to engage in the battles as well, with
I see, okay. We did learn about this hostile takeover of the original L Corp in the previous video that we checked out about Lobotomy Corporation, but I guess now we're getting just more details specifically about it. And it's neat that Roland sort of ties into the whole affair, but I wonder what his whole reaction is to, well, what Lobotomy Corporation was able to achieve, or if anybody really knew or understood, and if he even knows who Angela is. Because at the start of the video, we talked about how he's kind of just waiting here in order to kill somebody, basically. But who is that person?
Promises that those who performed well would eventually be paid lucrative sums of money and be given the option to migrate to the Nest, which is a rather coveted position within the city and comes with the protection of a corporate at your back. Which, with the setup of the Smoke Wars, it seems intentionally designed to mirror a series of religiously motivated military campaigns known as the Crusade, with Ein, Benjamin, and Dies all organizing the events to claim an area which they felt they needed. The militia was also comprised of mostly like-minded individuals, from the zealoted Oijas to the mercenaries, which could be persuaded into giving their lives for grand promises of land, money, absolution, and divine eternal glory. As well, the Crusades even connect back to Roland, or Orlando, as during the initial campaigns designed to recruit soldiers to become part of the Crusades, the legend of Charlemagne and his Holy 12 Paladins were co-opted into proto-Crusade propaganda, with even some stories claiming that Charlemagne and his 12 knights rose from the dead to fight along the Crusaders. Now, during the Smoke War, Roland was under the assumed employment of K-Corp, and would focus on dismantling L-Corp employees along with their associates, being able to claim at least 23 lives before he would meet up with another fixer who would help him become more aware of the world around him. This being the older Salvador, a stern but kind-hearted fixer who was participating in the Smoke Wars not because he needed the reward, but instead because his office was the one hired to do its job. And Salvador would spend most of his time with Roland acting as sort of his babysitter, teaching him things similar to how his gran would, even causing Roland to end up calling him Gramps later in life. Though, together, the two of them would witness something that they really shouldn't have. As within the facility of L-Corp was a creature of indescribable horror. The mere sight of it caused Roland to vomit uncontrollably, and the lasting mental damage of its presence would persist long past memory-erasing technology. Though, more importantly, while inside the labs of L-Corp, Roland would also ingest a large dosage of the L-Corp smoke, which helped alleviate ever so slightly his emotional numbness, helping him not only re-experience his emotions, but also allowed room from within his shadow for the seed of an ego to begin to form. Though it was this moment that also brought with it the overwhelming awareness of how the city worked. As, while he never really trusted Corpse before this, he now had evidence to suggest that no matter where he was in the city, he was never going to be truly safe. Even
I mean, does anybody trust the corporations? It would be smarter not to, but maybe they have kept it hush-hush to the point where regular people don't even realize. Well, actually, when we learned about the whole, the general setting itself, wasn't there the corporation that basically harvested time? Was it T-Corp? I'd assume so. By putting people into the trains, and then they get teleported to the next area in just a couple seconds. At least that's what it seems like, but in reality, they suffer for a very, very long time. And the regular folks have no idea that that's what's going on. So I guess, yeah, maybe people just don't know. Maybe the propaganda is too strong.
Even Salvador's presence here was a great example of this, as even though he was born into what anyone of the backstreets would consider exceeding wealth, as Salvador himself is a Nest-born citizen, he still involved himself with the dirty business of the world to stay afloat. As well, Salvador's lessons instilled in Roland the importance of never letting his guard down, which unfortunately would go on to breed a paranoia in the more emotionally vulnerable boy, as now, no matter matter how much he did, no matter how hard he worked, Roland could never escape the inevitable fate of his profession. The city itself is a monster that devours the weak, and things much larger than him run the world.
I mean, yeah. It's that realization that you're basically just another brick in the wall. Just another cog in this giant machine that doesn't really care about you. If it loses you, it can still function.
Was less than a cog in this machine. He was barely rust on the surface of one of the gears.
There you go.
And because of this, Roland would continue to wear his mask. Less now because of his grandmama's teachings, but more so as a much greater safety guard between his work and his true self. He had
that's fair actually. That puts up both like a physical as well as a mental block between what you do versus who you are. Although, of course, I guess the point here is that it starts to meld and the lines become a little hard to see. Not as well defined.
Had truly begun his persona integration, with his identity becoming the mask he wore. Though, with this all in mind, Roland would continue to find employment as a fixer, building up a good reputation and upping his grade until the point that he would be brought on as part of a grade 1 fixer group before he had even earned the title himself. This group, of course, being Charles's office, a small fixer office which was comprised of multi-talented individuals. Soon enough, the head of this office would assign Roland as leader of his 12 fixers, which of course mirrors the literary origins of the character. These members of the office were all also named after the Knights of Charlemagne, of course, and within its ranks, Roland had 2 close friends. These 2 being Olivier and Astolfo, which were likely selected to reference the close allies of Orlando, with the 2 characters even serving similar purposes in Orlando's stories.
Gotcha. I do recognize Astolfo, though, for reasons that you guys could probably figure out. I guess it's kind of sad, though, that a lot of the mythology or Western mythology like that I know of kind of comes from Fate. Not exactly the most accurate adaptation of any of those stories.
Firstly, Olivier, sometimes referred to as Oliver, was Orlando's closest friend, advisor, and confidant. Someone who was supposed to rein in the powerful knight when he had gone too far, but also support him in his actions. Which Olivier describes his relationship with Roland to be quite similar, being Roland's friend since they first met, saying that he had gotten along with him better than any other fixer in Charles' office, while also feeling the need to be his partner so that he could rein Roland in during their jobs, as Roland had a habit of jumping into things without thinking, though this wasn't always a bad thing. Olivier even grew to become envious of Roland's energy during their time together, with Roland even saving him a good number of times with his fast thinking, like during their first mission together in District 16, dealing with a culinary urban nightmare phenomenon called the Secret of the Demi-Glaze Sauce. And then you have Astolfo, who is based on the knight of the same name, which this knight is most notable for...
Well, yeah, I'm glad that the original creator is aware. This is exactly what people are going to think of the moment they hear Astolfo. It's just got way too popular.
Their role in Orlando Furioso specifically, where after Orlando goes mad with heartbreak, Astolfo is one of the ones who tries to directly comfort him in his madness. But after realizing that he can't fix him, he travels across the world to find a chariot which would allow him to reach the moon and recover Orlando's sanity, as all knights know that anything lost eventually ends up on the moon. Duh. The Astolfo of Charles' office
is that where all your left socks go whenever they go into the washing machine? They just get teleported to the moon. Maybe that pair of shoes that I lost didn't actually get stolen, but it's now on the moon. The next astronauts are going to go out there and find it.
It's actually very similar in relation to Roland, being the only member of the 12 fixers to actually reach out to Roland and try to calm him following the events of the White Knight in Dark Days. As well, according to one of Roland's bad endings, Astolfo was one of the only people that Roland would consider his friend fully from that office, with one of the weapons used to kill him being a lance that belonged to a friend. And in that scene, Astolfo is even seen looking over his former friend's body, body, and according to legend, a weapon often associated with Astolfo is a lance or spear with a golden color. Now, Roland did consider his time in Charles' office to be some of his better memories, as not only was he able to make a good amount of money, but he also earned the fixer rank of grade 1, though soon enough, the office would end up introducing him to a person who would go on to impact his life the most out of anyone. This, of course, being the strange silver-haired woman from the outskirts, Angelica, though she was much more than just a pretty face, being ranked as a color fixer known as the Black Silence. And it's due in part to her status that she would be partnered up with Charles' office's own leader, Roland, to tackle a particularly difficult job, this being hunting a star of the city level phenomenon known as a blood fiend, with the full title of the being Blood Red Knight. And while hunting the creature, both Angelica and Roland would begin to open up to each other, Angelica revealing not only her complicated and haunting past involving corp experiments and outskirts living, but also genuinely prying into Roland's own history, though she didn't do so out of some desire to find his weakness or mock him, but to truly understand him as a person, which is a feeling that he hadn't experienced before this, as while he had friends, he didn't have anyone who cared for him like she seemed to. And together, thanks to their shared agonies, the two of them became a devastating team, defeating not only Blood Red Knight, but also, in the calm after, Angelica would literally shatter the mask which Roland used to hide his sadness, forcing him out of his shell and allowing him to be genuine with a person for the first time in his life. Roland would come to view Angelica like an angel or savior figure following these events.
I mean, the naming is kind of on the nose, ain't it? But it's pretty amazing how, regardless of how far you think you've buried that side of yourself, because the world has essentially forced you into this, right? If you don't do this, if you don't have this persona to help protect you from the horrors around you, then you would break. But still, deep down, there's that very human side of you that wants to connect with somebody. You just gotta kind of like find the right person, the right moment. It'll happen, like it always does. And of course, in fiction, the moment that happens, the person that you connected with is gonna die. Like, more often than not, that is usually the answer.
He had enlightened him to the possibilities of a brighter future despite his darkened, tattered past, and instilled in him a desire to live for himself rather than others, and not to take on the burdens or agonies of the city, because sometimes that's that and this is this. Which became an infectious motto that would become Roland's answer to the hardships of the world. With
You know, it's pretty similar to what I say to myself when shit hits the fan. It is what it is. Sometimes the world is just shit. And regardless of what you do, that's just reality and how things work. And you can't really, like, create an entire uprising and change the laws of reality itself. But what you can do is find happiness in that somewhere, somehow, a reason to keep on keeping on.
Angelica teaching him the phrase not to discredit the suffering of others, but to create a divide between the agonies that he could and couldn't control. Angelica had become Roland's new foundation in a sense, and soon enough, the two would begin spending time together more frequently, either through missions or outside office work, Roland even making mention of borrowing Angelica's equipment from time to time to practice with it, until one day he would end up breaking one of her more expensive items, this being the Mook Workshop katana, which was considerably expensive. And to apologize for this, Roland decided to drag her across the city to a specific place in the back streets, seemingly District 25, to enjoy a nice meal together. This location being nice. Donghuang's Pub, a bar and grill combination restaurant with food unlike any others in the backstreet. The name of the pub is actually a running reference throughout the series of Project Moon's games in reference to its character artist, Kim Dong-hwan. Though this whole event just highlights a somewhat understated element of Roland's character.
I mean, honestly, it's kind of cool whenever you see references like that to the team behind the universe that they've created. Because at least to me, whenever you learn about a fact like that, it just really goes to show you how much care and appreciation the people who created this work have for it. And it gives me a lot more confidence in, enjoying the story itself.
Which is he's a bit of a foodie. Not only is it seen in his hobby of cooking, but Roland understands the importance of good food and has a fascination with finding diamonds in the rough throughout the backstreets, like this pub in particular. And it's this element of Roland's character that not only helps flesh out his own familiarity with different backstreets, but also shows his particular taste for quality. We've even seen evidence to suggest that Roland would risk his life before on missions to try out new and interesting food, like with the aforementioned Urban Nightmare tier demi-glace sauce. Hell, Roland even managed to break through the walls of fiction and reality to help bring one of his favorite restaurants into our world. This, of course, being the beloved Ham Ham Pang Pang. Originally appearing as just a sandwich chain that started in District 13's backstreets, whose food quality was so good that it actually improved the mental state of all those around the restaurant. Even Roland became quite a fan of their toasted sandwiches. It would eventually go on to become a real cafe in our world, located in Suwon, South Korea, with its appearance in-game appearing about 1 month before it would be announced IRL, and thus has become a very popular location for visiting fans, with Project Moon using it to promote their works with many different game theme events, and of course selling exclusive merchandise there.
That is a really cool idea. Project Moon is nothing if not ambitious in their ventures.
Do want the warp hat. Give it to me. Though, back to Dong Huang's, Roland hoped that the food there would be enough to apologize for the mishap with her sword, but Angelica's interpretation of the events was him indirectly asking her on a date, which in turn resulted in both parties ending up confessing their feelings for each other, with the two of them eventually getting married and building up a savings doing a ton of fixer work. They eventually settled down out of the fixer lifestyle and moved into a comparably spacious apartment in the best neighborhood they could find, this being the backstreets of District 9, as they both believe the more artistic and musical nature of District 9 made it a relatively safe area to live versus other parts of the city. Though Roland, even while retired, continued to work underworld or shady jobs that only a fixer of his caliber was equipped to, like when he intercepted an Incafellian trade for O-Corp by issuing out a shady contract to its dealer, with the ultimate goal of doing these jobs being that he wished to earn Nest migration papers, so he and his wife could live a much more comfortable life in a better place. Though, after learning that Angelica was pregnant, he made the decision to try to cash in his Smoke War veteran benefits. This way he could move him and his wife into a nest without much of a headache and they could actually retire. Though,
yeah. I mean, we kind of already know what happens, so it's like, it's no surprise. It's just, we're really adding on to the pain. We're just rubbing even more salt into the wound, aren't we?
in doing so, he was reminded of the grim reality of this world, because even after all the work he did, all the people's lives he ruined, the Corps did not hold true to their promises. With I-Corp, K-Corp, and O-Corp discarding him without a second thought.
No, even if you have proof, they're going to gaslight you with, "We're sorry that you misunderstood our terms." These fucking corporations, man.
Changing the contract he signed so that it could deny veteran access after a certain point, leaving Roland without any options. And the happier his life got, the more the looming dread that something or someone could take it away from him began to creep in. Then came the day where Roland received a call from one of his close friends, Olivier, a former member of Charles' office and someone who desperately needed his assistance on a mission in District 25. Roland felt like he needed to help, as well due to Olivier's connections, that in doing this task, he might earn himself some migration papers, so he went to Angelica to ask her if he could go. She then assured him in his decision, telling him that she'll be here waiting for him when they get back. And in strong spirits, Roland departed, and it is during the events of this mission that a glowing beam of golden light would soon erupt from the nest of District 12. This beautiful warmth then drowned out the dreary darkness that clouded over the city. For 3 days, the people of the city experienced a surplus of emotions and enjoyment. These moments were referred to as the White Nights. But just as quickly as the light came, it vanished.
Despair.
And for 4 days, pure darkness clouded the city. This event is referred to as the Dark Days, and it was during this time, down in a crummy underground bar in the rougher areas of District 9, a down-on-his-luck musician would hear the voice of his beloved instrument cry out to him. In this despair, he would begin to smash his body into a piano, slamming his hands and face into the keys over and over again, as his anguish began to be countered out by the euphoric bliss of fusing with his beloved instrument. Until soon, the piano itself began to grow in size, its elegant keys elongated with the man's arms growing in turn. The patrons of the bar watched on in horror as the more the man played the piano, the greater his body distorted. And this sound eventually took on a physical form as the bodies of the bargoers began to contort into note-like shapes. The music of this backstreets performer now being heard all across the city, and those unlucky enough to be close to the piano itself would be absorbed and melded into the megastructure. This is the first reported case of the distortion phenomenon, known simply as the pianist. And it's this incident that resulted in the death of 80% of District 9's population.
Holy shit.
With citizens either...
Imagine living in District 9. Well, I fucked up. It's not like, well, I don't really know if you can choose. There's probably plenty of people who don't even have the choice, so you just kind of drew the wrong lot in life. But you know what? It is what it is sometimes. That's just the way it goes.
Being dissolved into music-like notes or being fused together with the piano, which, due in part to the apocalyptic nature of this disaster, the Zwei Association issued an emergency response, dispatching their colored fixer, the Blue Reverberation, also known as Argelia, who just so happened to be the brother of Angelica. Though, by the time that Argelia arrived, the pianist had already been dealt with, his arms severed and his body laid slump over his keys. As, assumedly in response to the word about the pianist, Roland had returned home to find it in ruins.
Yeah.
And thus he donned his mask and took Durandal in hand. Roland would jump the pianist, ending his performance once and for all. Though, amongst the rubble and ruins that comprised the piano, Roland noticed a familiar body, his beloved Angelica. Her being now melded into the base of the piano, a hand extended out in agony. Roland was long too late to save his angel, and in one night, the city had taken from him his wife, his unborn child, and his hopes of any beautiful future. In his grief, Roland...
You could say that was probably like a pretty bad day for him. He may have been a little bit sad about that. Perhaps this may even be a character-defining moment.
Roland would begin to wear his wife's gloves. Though, he might have actually started wearing them to slay the pianist itself. It is not entirely clear here, as the gloves themselves, when worn, have a silencing effect that counteract the pianist's own music. So it's very possible that Roland's first kill with these gloves, which are the signature tool of the Black Silence, was the pianist.
The idea is somewhat reinforced by the fact that the pianist's death is attributed to the Black Silence. Gotcha. And who are these people? It's like they're going out to do the purge or something.
But again, that is mostly speculation. What isn't speculation is how he would begin to use them to achieve his vengeance. As Roland began to compile a list of suspects who could have possibly been responsible for such a needless disaster, from underground associates, monstrous cultists, or even other fixer agencies, Roland was thorough with this list, and once he had finished it, he began checking names off it, in a wrath-filled massacre that stretched across the whole city. From slaughtering a scientist who had begun kidnapping people for the purpose of turning them into gears. Likely because his research of disfiguring people into gears reminded him of properties of the pianist's own music.
Gears? Are they guilty? Was this a term mentioned in the previous video that we checked out? I don't recall. Maybe my memories of like the Guilty Gear lore and the Project Moon lore are starting to mix now. I guess it's extremely difficult, especially when like certain terms are reused or used in a different way in a different series.
Roland then eradicated a factory and its workers who were attempting to revive the dead through puppetry, with the result being a complete perversion of life. grafting the bodies of kidnapped citizens into a massive clump, which of course resembles the nature of the pianist's own piano. He even ended up targeting the cartel he used to do business with, Roland eventually managing to cripple one of the 5-finger syndicates in its entirety, this of course being the middle finger, causing them to go all but extinct.
Of course it
was. Though his rampage soon became a formless bloodbath, as he just began slaughtering fixer agencies who had nothing to do with him.
Yeah, there you go. When you get to a certain point, it's like, what are you even doing this for anymore? Like, how many bodies will it take for you to be satisfied? Unfortunately, there is no end.
Leaving a countless pile of bodies in his wake, operating the entire time under the guise of his wife's former identity, the Black Silence. And all of these events are in part a direct reference to Roland's namesake, and more specifically, Orlando Innamorato and Orlando Furioso. To summarize shortly, the name of his wife and brother-in-law come directly from the main love interest of Orlando Innamorato, this being the beautiful Angelica, Princess of Cathay, who was known to be a flirt that liked to lure in men and watch them fight over her. She oftentimes would have them battle her brother, Argilia, who was a fierce warrior of his own. Angelica
is that Yu-Gi-Oh art, by the way?
Would go on to meet Orlando alongside his allies of Ronaldo and a few other knights depending on which version you're reading, and would have them duel in order against her brother Argilia for her.
Honestly, yeah, I should have known. Like, the Noble Knights archetype probably has all these characters in there.
Hand in marriage. Eventually, an unsavory third party would mortally wound Argilia, causing Angelica, Orlando, and Ronaldo to flee to her kingdom. Though during the travels there and back, a lot of weird love-related miscommunication would occur, but most importantly, Orlando would end up getting feverishly jealous of Ronaldo and would erupt into a violent act of swordsmanship, until eventually, at the request of King Charlemagne, who was in desperate need of his greatest knights to assist him fending off an invading force in France, requested that Angelica use the safety of his country as the final test of love for the powerful knight. And while this did work to bring Orlando back to France, his fighting became feverish and brutal, as his want for a perfect life with Angelica caused him to get more and more destructive rather than helpful. And matters were made even worse when Angelica would eventually be gifted a magic ring that caused her to vanish from the world, making it impossible for Orlando to ever find her after the war. And while in her lost state, she would eventually fall for another man, this being a simple infantry soldier of a low-class status, essentially a nobody compared to Roland. And the only reason she fell for him is that she got to nurse him back to health when she found him injured in the woods. And it was the announcement of their marriage that completely drove Orlando over the edge. His rage spread across his own country like a destructive hurricane until he was force-fed his wits by Astolfo and Olivier, causing him to fall out of love with Angelica and eventually let her go. And a good deal of these poems can be seen in Roland's love story with Angelica.
Oh yeah, for sure.
As she was always the one in control of the relationship, similar in manner to the Angelica of the poems. As well, Roland shares Orlando's confrontational history with Argilia, a brother who he'd have to have defeated in combat in order to win Angelica's hand, with Roland even constantly calling Argilia insulting names and not being very fond of his personality even before he went insane. As well, Angelica is lost to Roland while he is out on an important mission, fighting alongside his fellow paladins for a specific cause, and of course it was a mission given to him by a close ally. Roland is also seen working extra hard at the jobs that he does because he wants to guarantee a beautiful future with his wife. As well, his destructive rampage following the events of the White Knights and Dark Days is comparable on scale to that of the legendary knights, as even other colored fixers of notable skill levels were unsure if they could have even dealt with Roland in his prime if he ever came knocking, as seen in Leviathan during Virgilius' flashback to his one encounter with Roland at this time. And the poem's rampage is even represented perfectly in Roland's deck, being tied to his own original skill, Orlando, and its strongest skill card, Furioso. Though again, unlike the knight, Roland's rampage would see him stripped of all his merits, the Hana Association demoting him back down to the status of a grade 9 fixer and blacklisting him from most offices, which in turn forced Roland to begin his own agency.
I mean, when you go and do something like that, there's gonna be some consequences. You probably expected it.
single man office, where he would wallow in his own misery, spending nights alone in a home which was slightly too big for a single person and was decorated like a time capsule of a better world. An empty crib sitting in the corner waiting longingly for a child who would never arrive.
Holy shit, dude. Man, at that point you're just tormenting yourself of what ifs, what could have been.
Though, in his loneliness, he would be revisited by a woman we hadn't seen in years. A purple viper looking to give him a shot at a being who had brought him this misery. This visitor was his adopted grandmother and personal trainer, Iori, the Purple Tear, and she brought him news of a location in Elcorp's Nest known as the Library. Likely understanding his loss, Iori would offer him a job of a lifetime, as inside the newly emerging phenomenon known as the Library was likely the source of his grief, and using her special talents, she could easily get him inside, and from that point on, he would have the freedom to do as he pleased, which means he could eventually decide the fate of the being behind the White Nights and Dark Days. Roland agrees to this idea, and thus begins the events of Library of Ruina. With Roland...
So, is his whole thing going to be deciding whether or not he kills Angela?
Appearing within the library, seemingly out of nowhere, he was soon greeted by a pale woman draped in all black. This was the director of the library and an all-powerful being within its walls. She quickly dismembered Roland with the snap of her fingers, questioning him all the while on why and how he arrived. Thinking quick, Roland began to explain his position through sprinkles of truth, telling her he didn't exactly understand how he got to the library himself, and how he had simply just been in District 13 one second and was here the other. The director, realizing now that he wasn't a threat, reassembles Roland, even giving him a few enhancements of her own, and then offers him employment as a librarian within her walls, introducing herself as Angela, a name which strikes a chord with Roland almost immediately, but he begrudgingly accepts her offer and is assigned as the patron librarian of the floor of General Works, also known as the Keter floor. His
Of course it is. But also, like, what is Angela's goal here with the whole library? I guess she was... Because Angela was in Lobotomy Corporation, right, as the android? Or maybe homunculus is, like, the correct term there. Who was sort of stuck within that time loop with the main character that entire time. So I guess now she's just out and about trying to achieve something? I mean, the whole reason the White Knight is gone now is because of her. So what was the plan? Just to learn about the world more?
job there was to greet guests to the library and fight them to the death, so that they would then become books within the library's shelves and share information of the outside world with Angela, who was—
Oh shit. Wait. So when you die in the library, you become a book? And so, I see, as a librarian, your job is to kill as many people as possible who enter the library in order to give Angela information. That's kind of... It's kind of metal, actually. Thank goodness I don't live in this universe.
Was in pursuit of the perfect book, which could help her become truly human, and be able to leave the shackles she was bound with. And thus, Roland would begin to bide his time in the library, working for Angela and waiting for the perfect moment to act. And it is
the shackles she was binded with. So is there something specifically preventing her from leaving? Maybe they talked about it in the last one, but I've already forgotten if there was a detail like that. Or maybe it's just like her programming or something. Yeah, that might be it. And she wants to become human in order to maybe like gain some sort of sentience in order to just leave here to make a decision on her own. Also might have something to do with the purpose that she was created for, because I think that purpose kind of got twisted because of the way it was worded.
Is in this process that he gets a much more up-close perspective at the underworkings of the city. As well, very familiar to his old work as a fixer, this new job required him to kill a lot of people. From down-on-their-luck fixers with briefs of their own, monstrous phenomena that haunt the back streets, and old associates of his, such as Oscar, Eugen, and even Salvador. Though none of those he met within the library realized who they were facing, as Roland had hid his face through most of his career, and due in part to the nature of the perception perception-blocking mask, it made
I
him
see.
hard to remember or even notice. As well, throughout the course of the game, Roland avoids bringing up or even mentioning his past without being directly asked about it, as he's trying to avoid blowing his cover by any means necessary. But if confronted on it, he isn't unwilling to share. And because of this, ever so slightly, Angela begins to piece together that Roland is more than he claims to be. As well, while the people of the city would begin dying, the library itself would slowly become a more lively place, as the
I wonder if the final book that Angela is going to need is going to be of Roland. Like, Roland has to die for Angela to gain that human sentience, to become human, in order to leave the library.
those slumbering within its walls begin to slowly spring awake one by one. These all being the returning cast of Lobotomy Corp, the Sephiroth, and Abnormalities, with the Sephiroth being reincarnated yet again, though with all of their memories intact and a new assignment given to them by Angela involving the nature of the city and humans as a whole. And together with Roland, they all begin greeting their own guests, quelling abnormalities within the library, and eventually reaching different types of realizations about the city and the nature of Angela's actions as a whole. And it is through these actions that Roland learns that Angela is directly responsible for the distortion phenomena, and in turn is the person who killed his wife. And it was all due to a tantrum that she threw at the end of Lobotomy Corp. With this, Roland now knew his target fully, but he couldn't do it until the right moment. Partly because, as she was now, Angela was unkillable, so he needed her to become more human. But also, he wanted to know her reasonings for why she did what she did, and
Interesting. That's a really cool setup, too. Because now he has the purpose of doing what she told him to do in order to get her to become human, so then he can kill her for his wife's death. But obviously Angela is also using him in order to do something probably much greater than what she's telling him to.
What she planned to do after she was successful. But most importantly, he wanted to snub her right before she had achieved her true happiness, delivering her a death full of the suffering that she had indirectly inflicted him with, one that he felt she fully deserved. So,
well, him and so many other people out there too. Because they had been given hope. If they didn't know of hope, or that sort of feeling of being able to go out there and do something about it, right? Then they wouldn't have felt such a deep despair. I get it. You know, this whole, like, revenge plotline makes a ton of sense, actually.
Roland continued to wear his mask, the personality of a cool-headed and quippy fixer, someone who just let go of all of his problems, because sometimes that's that, and this is this. Though, the longer he worked for Angela, the more her story became prevalent to him, seeing the reasons behind her emotional outbursts, learning the full history of her cursed existence which led to literally 1,000,000 years worth of suffering that she could do nothing about. And eventually, she would be discarded to the wayside by her creator and expected to just lay down and die after serving her purpose. All feelings that Roland had become all too familiar with himself. Angela and him weren't too different. He could even say that he considered her his friend after a while, and the two of them would begin growing more and more comfortable with each other's presence.
I kind of love it, though, the whole dynamic between two people who are enemies, but, you know, they don't reveal it to each other. But they kind of have to work with each other, and then slowly over time, they just grow closer and closer, and they're like, we're not so different, you and I. But then in the end, how does it all go down? How does it all break apart? Because obviously the cookie has to crumble, but in what sort of fashion?
Angela eventually referring to him by his name, and Roland sharing with her his own history. Though, alongside getting to know Angela, Roland would get to know the other patrons of the library, with 4 of them mattering the most to his story in specific, these 4 being Tifereth, Gebera, Hesed, and Bina, all with personalities that conflicted or retroactively redefined Roland's own personal values. So,
also, while it is like a carryover, it's a pretty good use of, like, we already have this character and this character design, why don't we just reuse it, right? I wonder how differently they're presented in this story, though. Especially considering the fact that they remember what has happened, right?
Let's begin with one of my personal favorite of the Sephiroth, Tifereth, who gains her name from the 6th branch of the Kabbalic Tree of Life and is a representation of spirituality, compassion, and the balance in oneself. Described as delightful and glorious, the Tifereth is a beacon of light that is represented greatly in her character, as she is someone who, while openly aggressive and, for lack of a better word, tsundere, is still one of the most level-headed of the Sephiroth, being the first person in the library who Roland meets that isn't openly hostile towards Angela after the ending of Lobotomy Corp. Not because she isn't angry though, but because she isn't able to fully blame Angela after learning her story, and saves her judgment on Angela till after she has made her final decision on what—
I mean, who could? If you went through that experience, you'd probably be even worse. It's just an insane amount of time doing the same thing over and over again in an inescapable prison that would drive anybody mad. So yeah, it's hard to blame her, but the things that she did was still not great.
What she'll do with her life. She even doesn't hold it against Angela for puppeting them within the library, as Angela is simply doing to them what Ein did to her, if not being more charitable by not treating the librarians as expendable. Though, this more positive outlook of Tifereth doesn't seem to come from blind optimism. Instead, it was developed through the pain she suffered due in part to the events of Lobotomy Corp, watching helplessly as her brother was killed and revived over and over again, with each time that the pain drove them mad, they would be disposed of and replaced. This perversion of her brother's memory brought out a writhing nihilism in Tiff, until eventually she was able to conclusively see her brother's suffering come to an end.
That is also completely understandable as well. At some point, you're going to wonder about the meaning of your suffering, once you've suffered, like, a lot over and over and over again. And I can definitely see these sort of conclusions being the natural way of things. It's really cool how these characters have, from the first game to the second one, certainly evolved in a way that you would expect them to, because of the things that had happened to them. Just a more natural way of writing characters.
Her character growth of being able to accept death and move on from it is a vital element to Roland's own development as a character. And it is during their conversations that Roland is slowly forced to confront his own nihilistic feelings about the city and his—
I mean, yeah, when you've met somebody who has gone through the same thing, essentially, but just over and over and over again for a much longer amount of time, and you hear these words, and maybe somewhere deep down you know that that's how it is, and that's true, but you kind of have to get there. You can say anything, but truly understanding that is a whole different process.
Life. These agonies that he is allowed to fester in his heart for well too long, which in part were forced onto him by the city, though it is Tifereth's brutal honesty in her words that cut deep with Roland.
It's you.
As well, her tendency for physical violence during arguments reminds him a lot of his lost Angelica. Tifereth shows Roland that holding on to the memories of someone precious, while painful, doesn't need to make you hopeless. That drowning yourself in misery will never help anything. And it is these words that—
It feels really nice, though, to be in that state of mild depression all the time. It's safer that way. You don't have to feel up, you don't have to feel down, you're just kind of sad, and the world is shit, so, like, why should I care? But, yeah, no. That's not really living. That's not really accepting things as they are. That's denial of them. More an escapism, if you will.
Eventually cause Roland's emotions to reach a critical state, and the abnormalities associated with Tifereth's floor all begin to resonate with him, fusing with Roland in his empty state and gifting him a shifting mass of corrosive, overwhelming egos. With the first abnormality to resonate with Roland being the Queen of Hatred, a magical girl who embodies the concept of love and whose whole purpose in life is defeating villains. Though,
That's
because
funny.
she attributes her value based on the existence of evil, she herself at her core also embodies hatred, as if she is left in a peaceful state for too long, she will slowly begin to question her very purpose in life until she reaches the conclusion that to justify her existence, she needs to become a villain for others to fight. Her love essentially drives her mad, which are elements that are directly relevant to Roland's own journey for a purpose and how when his purpose was stripped away from him, he became an uncontrollable monster. Next, Roland would vessel the Servant of Wrath, the only one of the magical girl abnormalities to not make an appearance in Lobotomy Corp's main game, but instead would appear in the comic side series Wonder Labs. Servant of Wrath, much like the other magical girls, believes that there is an importance to fairness and balance in the world, though eventually found the courage to reach out to others to trust them, but after being manipulated by a sinister figure who stole everything from them and thus turned those they loved into puppets, they lost themselves to rage and hunted the hermit in a beast-like state. Roland embodies this abnormality in so many ways, some that I haven't even mentioned yet, but more importantly, one element of Servant of Wrath's story in Wonder Lab is the relationship with an employee named Biozi, who believed friendship was a mutual exploitation of one another, which is almost verbatim how Roland describes his friendship with Angela throughout most of the game.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely see it that way. It's like one of those things that both of you probably understand, but you don't really mention because, you don't really have to talk about it. But there is a bit of an exchange in terms of friendship of like taking time out of your day to at least listen to what another person has to say. Help them out, they help you. Scratch your back, you scratch mine. It's not purely transactional, but there is just a unspoken understanding there. It's hard to really define though, because I think especially nowadays, the term friend is just kind of thrown around willy-nilly. Like, what does it even mean to be somebody's friend? Is it just adding them on Facebook? I think social media has kind of blurred the lines there a lot between friends and acquaintances and just people that you know.
Following this, Roland then embodies the Knight of Despair, a powerful magical girl knight that represents the feelings of despair felt by someone who initially fought in the name of justice and valued an empire to create a better world, only to learn the truth of said world or empire is violent and dreary, and thus, those they fought for lost sight of what once made them so wonderful.
That is such a cool design though. Probably my favorite so far that we've seen of the magical girls, I guess?
Which in turn distorted the knight into someone who would turn their blade on the very world they once fought to save, with the lore of the Knight of Despair describing it as someone who, through a repeated cycle of faith and betrayal, was left with only one emotion that is expressed through black tears, which has many connecting points back to Roland, but more specifically in his early history, with him learning the truth of the city causing him immense psychological discomfort and the looming dread associated with knowing that no matter what he did, it was all for naught. As well, the term knight works very well with his sort of boy-soldier-like history, and of course ties back to the knights and paladins of Charlemagne legend. And then finally, Roland has the King of Greed tape shape in his body, the final of the magical girls, and someone who represents the idea that happiness is rooted in greed and will eventually become an all-consuming sadness thanks to the nature of happiness being unquenchable. And her powerful, all-consuming view on happiness is reflected in Roland's own mindset, as he doesn't believe that there's any true way to become happy anymore, instead choosing to seal himself off in a cage of his choosing, much like how the King of Greed seals herself off in a massive chamber of amber, though both of these cages are very capable of becoming terrifying beasts. Though, once all 4 phases of the boss rush have been completed, Roland's ego will take its true shape, this being the Ruina original, Jester of Nihil, an embodiment of nihilism and the belief that life itself has no value. More specifically, it's a boss fight that encapsulates Roland's mindset throughout his life up to this point, including his connection to the mask of the persona, as the Jester of Nihil is literally wearing the type of mask that inspired the word. Also, this form in which Roland takes is supposed to represent both the Fool in the Tarot set, but also the Trump card or Joker from a deck of playing cards, as not only is it a common motif for Roland as a character, but also works in line with the magical girl's own playing card suit theme. His role as the Joker also gives him control over the negative aspects of the magical girls, with the Joker being literally a trump card, trumping all of their achievements, with them all appearing on his side as hollow shells of what they were supposed to represent. As well, his screen text reflects Roland's own feelings on the uncertainty and trauma inflicted on him by the city. Though, as the fight progresses, Tifereth and her assistants remind Roland that it is through the pain that these magical girls represent that allows them to become better, as in defeating the shells of Nihil's summons, the assistants of Tifereth can embody the positive feelings created by these agonies. Soon, greed returns to happiness, hatred dissolves, dissolves into love, despair solidifies into justice, and wrath reforms into courage. And for the first time, these four figures stand together, but instead of bringing untold disaster like Lobotomy Corp had warned about, instead, they bring hope, defeating Nile and snapping Roland out of his unstable mental state, reminding
Man, that is such a cool way to do this battle, and to represent that sort of idea, right? That these things exist together, and without them, there isn't the good things in life either. In fact, through them, you begin to appreciate things more. But yeah, it is just an unfortunate truth that in order to experience happiness, you also have to experience suffering. I think I made a comment about this already when it came to Lobotomy Corporation, but just the way that they've designed the enemies, the bosses, and the ideas that they wish to represent with those particular characters or enemies, I think the game does a very good job in that aspect. The character designer knows what they're doing. And also, like, the developers themselves and the way they implement it into the game, all these things that they want to convey, they implement it through gameplay mechanics, which is just so cool.
Him that while there is fear involved with losing yourself, life isn't about how you used to be, but more so who you are now and where you're going to be, and that you should carry the memories of who you used to be into that future. She helped Roland see the small glimmer of light in the distance through the long dark tunnel that has been his misery.
내게는 고통밖에 없습니다. 그것 말고는 아무것도 바라지 않았습니다. 고통은 내게 충실했고 지금도 변함이 없습니다.
Yeah, man, that's really heavy, but also very true. Your suffering won't betray you. It will always be there to comfort you, question mark? But yeah, like, we're only halfway through this video, and I can already see the signs of, like, an amazing story shaping up here. I love a lot of the themes that we're presenting here, and the way that we're presenting them. It's just the kind of smart writing that I think I should expect from Project Moon as a whole. Like, we already saw a lot of this in Lobotomy Corporation, and I think here we're just really expanding upon that idea, using previous things that we've already set up. However, I'm gonna have to call things here for now. So, thank you guys so much for joining me. Hope you guys enjoyed your time here, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll catch you guys in part 2.